That and much more coming up on FreightWaves Now. And welcome into FreightWaves Now. I'm your host, Bill Priestley, here alongside Anthony Smith.
And on this Thursday show, in just a few moments, we're going to have Thomas Wasson talking about some, of course, trucking trends because he is our enterprise trucking expert. We also have Tony Mulvey here in a few moments with On the Spot segment in the next hour. But first, our top story talks about a partnership that's going to involve Hyliion, and it unveils a new next generation truck with Alan Adler here to talk about it. Alan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, guys. Nice to see you. So Hyzon has been in trouble for some time now, and they're still facing some difficulties. So it was interesting yesterday to see during Hyliion's earnings call that they announced, actually they did it the night before, but nobody noticed. They announced that they're going to do a fuel cell powered truck with Hyzon. This is just a one-off for right now. However, it is representative of the third generation. Mind you, we're not even out with the first truck yet, but the third generation of the Hypertruck ERX. This is essentially a series hybrid that in the beginning will run on natural gas and electricity. Then it'll move to a newfangled generator technology that Hyliion purchased from General Electric last year. And then finally, they'll get to a fuel cell. What's significant is the choice of the company, because Hyzon has a ton of background. It was spun out of a company called Fuel Cell Technologies out of Singapore about as a SPAC in 2021. But Fuel Cell Technologies goes back to about 2003. So they have a ton of experience building fuel cell stacks. They purchased the old General Motors Honeyway Falls facility near Rochester, New York, and also have a facility in Chicago. So technologically, Hyzon is way equal to the task. Not a problem there at all. The question, and nobody on the call yesterday, no one on the call, in the analyst call asked it, was, what about their survivability? Will they be here to actually do this this truck? Because they've got issues with keeping their listing on the NASDAQ. That is Hyzon, not Hyliion, and they've got a couple of federal investigations underway right now. So they have a lot of distractions, but that probably doesn't affect the engineers who would work on a program like this. Interestingly, I talked to Thomas Healy, the CEO of Hyliion, yesterday after his earnings call, and I asked the question, are you all aware of and concerned about Hyzon's survivability? And he said, my general counsel prepped me for that question and no one asked it. And I said, well, they've asked it now. And he said, no comment.
Wow, interesting. I was going to ask what, just as an overview of the entire situation, what does Hyzon bring to the equation? Obviously, there are questions, and there obviously are very solid benefits of that relationship there as well. Is this a risky move, or is this something that looks like it's going to pan out?
Well, to do a one-off truck by the end of the year, Bill, probably not a big deal. I think you're basically taking a Peterbilt 579 Model 579 that Hyliion. This is going to be confusing. So you got to hold me that Hyliion has, and they've got good access to the Peterbilt trucks. They're going to pull the internal combustion engine, replace it with a fuel cell, and then just essentially mate it with its own powertrain technologies that they do for the other technologies that they're using. So probably not a great risk in a one-off. The question, of course, would be if they decided down the road, and Hyliion is so funny because they used to rail against fuel cells as not being ready, and there's no hydrogen infrastructure, and all of that is still true, by the way. But we're getting a lot more attention to hydrogen these days, and you do have companies like Nikola, which is branded now. It's fuel cell, it's hydrogen stations. So we're getting a little closer. And I think I asked Thomas yesterday, I said, is this basically just a hedge against, the world getting to fuel cell trucking quicker? And he said, well, I guess you could call it that. He said, but we really do believe there's a future for it. We don't know about long haul trucking yet, but we think it'll start out in the regional space and that sort of thing. So obviously, Thomas Healy himself and Hyliion has come around to the idea that hydrogen will be a player in the out years on alternative fuel trucking. But for right now, they're still working to get that first version of the Hypertruck ERX out, starting production late in the fourth quarter this year. And then they have about 210 orders that people have actually put money on for those trucks. And they expect to finish those by the first quarter of 2024, both in their own facility in Austin, Texas, and then possibly with some modification companies like that could also work on it. So I think the idea, the play here is this is sort of the product roadmap for Hyliion. It was interesting that Hyzon did put out a press release on it. Not a lot of commentary, just the basics yesterday. There's really not a lot of money, no money really changing hands here. This is just a project to do it. I asked Thomas Healy also, did you talk to others? And he said, well, sure we did. He said, but that's all under NDA. I mean, for example, Bosch, which is supplying the fuel cell stack for the Nikola Tre fuel cell electric vehicle coming out this year, would obviously be one of the stops you would make. And there are a few other places you'd go. But selling with Hyzon is interesting, and it could be a real boon to Hyzon as well, especially if they can get past some of these issues. They did get an extension, for example, from the NASDAQ on their listing. They were in pretty tough shape as far as holding on to their listing. They don't trade for much. Their market value isn't particularly high right now. They're $1 in some sense a share. We've seen that with a lot of these startups. But I think, it was an interesting move. And it was interesting that you announced it during earnings too.
And speaking of that, Alan, can you give us a quick recap of those earnings that were for Hyliion during the fourth quarter?
Yeah, Anthony, this is interesting about these guys because we talk about so many of the companies, these startups that were SPACs, and Hyliion was one of them, as was Hyzon, running out of money, needing to go to the capital markets and things like that. Hyliion is an outlier here. They had, at the end of 2022, about $422 million in cash and equivalents on their balance sheet. That's pretty healthy compared to some of these others. And their CFO said yesterday, John Panzer, said that they will burn about 130 to 140 million in cash next year, or this year, I should say, in 2023, and then, need to spend some money to buy parts to build these trucks that, to build the powertrains for these trucks that they're converting into the Hypertruck ERX. So maybe a total of 200 million still leaves them a pretty good runway to get through a scaling of production of the first version of the ERX and then on to this General Electric technology called it's not in front of me this morning. Carno. I keep thinking of the old Johnny Carson thing, Carnac, but it's Carno, which is a technology. It's a fuel agnostic technology for their generator that could run on. You could burn anything in it, hydrogen or any number of different fuels to power the truck. So that's number two. They're actually going to show that technology, a mock-up of it, in May at the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo in Anaheim, where we'll be attending. So it'll be interesting to see that particular thing as well.
Alan, as you look at this with Hyliion, and obviously this is one of the few companies that we get to talk about that's working with hydrogen, how do you estimate the hydrogen market right now versus what other companies are doing, say, in electricity?
Well, I think it's still a BEV world, better electric vehicle world, Bill, and it will be for a while, especially on the medium duty side. We had Mike Roth from the North American Council for Freight Efficiency on the Truck Tech show yesterday, and he was saying that, there is a case to be made for Class 8s with battery electric, and of course he looks at hydrogen as an out-year technology, but mostly you're going to see this electrification is going to remain very, very strong in the kind of Class 4 to 6 area, as far as the medium duties, repeatable routes, package delivery, last mile, and things like that. So that's where your first big burst of electrification is going to come. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do a fuel cell or hydrogen product there because ultimately, the value of hydrogen is going to be for long haul. It's going to be a substitute for diesel in terms of both being a drop-in fuel that you can fuel very similarly to a diesel, and and just go basically. So the idea of the fuel cells, they're still a little ways off. You're going to see the first one from Nikola, in production late this year. In fact, I'm going to go out and take a look at the plant in a couple of weeks when I'm in Arizona, and I'm going to get a chance to get a look up close at the fuel cell operation, so you can watch for something out of that. But I think that, we're still a ways off, but hydrogen is absolutely on the stage now. It is not waiting to come on stage.
Awesome, Alan. Well, we're looking forward to your upcoming Truck Tech newsletter and, of course, more updates around this topic. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, guys.
Right now, we're going to go over to the wall for our next carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update. And Donnie, going to start here looking at what's going on in the overall market. Obviously, yesterday was the first day of the month. See the reaction in the volumes, right? Start to decline, but rejections did pick up a little bit, but I mean, they're still near historic lows.
Yeah, I mean, almost, I want to try to call it a trend from the 15th to today. Up 0.25% in 15 days. But no, I get it. So, yeah, we did see a rebound in volumes here. And I wanted to bring us, we bounced all the way up to, almost to 10,500. Mm-hmm. So a good response in volumes. Thumbs up over 10,000. We want to keep it there. We did drop down for just a few days. Under 10,000, but we'll see where we go from here. You were talking about it last night. The gloom of what maybe to come in the first few weeks of March, and this could allow volumes to drop below 10,000. Yep. And you're talking with Luke and Tanner, and it was a good conversation. What was your TV show?
With Sonar.
With Sonar. Yeah. What time does it come on?
It is 3 o'clock on Wednesdays.
3 o'clock on Wednesdays. Very good show to watch, very informative. And like I say, they were discussing this as well and what's to come through March. And it looks pretty gloomy. And we expect spot rates to drop possibly up to 15 cents more a mile in March, up to about March 15th. Yeah. Then about March 15th, it looks like there could be a little bit of a turnaround and the spot market bounce kind of back to where it was when we started. Yep. And hopefully we'll see the bounce back in volumes. So we're looking at a tough month. Now, I do want to point out volumes, 10,431. We beat the beginning of February by about 120 basis points, I believe. I believe it was around 10,310 or 312. So we did beat it. And actually, that is kind of a trend that we do actually see in February. Normally, we see a little bit of an increase in February, but March, we normally kind of see a decrease sometimes.
Yeah, and some of that it's a seasonal pattern, and there is some effects of Lunar New Year and things like that, right? Because it kind of depends on when that holiday is for when things get here and when there's a lull in the freight market, right? This year started there in the 22nd of January. So, I mean, you really started to see the lull in imports leaving overseas, coming in here right around that same time. Then you start to see import shipments, that are clearing customs. We talked about this yesterday. Yeah. About 17 to 20 days later, really start to fall off. They've done that. But that stuff that was coming in right before the Lunar New Year is the stuff that's moving there in the back half of the month. Whereas, because it does take some time from the time it clears customs to when it ends up in a truck.
Cross-docked, et cetera. Yes.
Yeah, so there is some of that seasonal, you get the little bump from what comes right after Christmas, things like that, some restocking. But really, it's a seasonal pattern, and that's why March, at least the beginning of March, is typically weaker than the end of February because you're having the lull in imports that are hitting in mid-February, and then they're ending up in a truckload in early March.
Yep. Good information. Let's go to the next chart here and let's break some of this down, Tony. So if we're looking at tender volumes, I'm going to break this down here by long haul, tweener haul, mid haul, short haul, and basically the city haul. And you see, very strong. We still have long hauls leading the way here of that 10,026.85. Now, grouped down here together are the tweener haul, the short haul, the mid haul, and the city. And they're pretty close here within a few hundred points. So the average here is your is, well, the majority of the freight would be the shorter hauls. If you added them all together, but they're all about equal. And then of course you have your long hauls. And these are some of the ones that are really going to be hurting here on our rates right now, because these are 800 miles plus. I was looking for lanes today. I was looking at Omaha. Well, I mean, to find some good cities and whatnot out of Omaha that are 800 miles, think where Omaha is.
Yeah.
An 800-mile circle, yeah, Omaha to Maine, that's not a realistic lane. But because it was so central, it's kind of hard to find those lanes that were 800 miles that actually made sense.
Yep.
I did find a few that we'll look at here, though. But you can break this down, and you can also break this down by each city as well. So when we come back, we'll run through this. We'll break it down by rejection rates as well, but you can break that down by city as well. So always look at what's going on in these markets.
Awesome stuff, Donnie. As always, thank you for this update. Right now, we'll hand it over to Bill Priestley.
And with your first check of headlines, I'm Bill Priestley. New data from container leasing indexes shows that even with the slide in import demand and freight rates falling, the container ship charter market is still alive and well. The hotbox index, which measures charter rates across multiple size ships, has dropped 77% from an all-time high in March of 2022, but the pace of decline has lessened, and the index has stabilized in recent weeks and remains at more than double its 2019 pre-COVID level. Alphaliner reported that Asia demand is picking up back up following the Lunar New Year holiday, and tonnage should continue to rise in the coming weeks. Freight forwarder Wasson Logistics has acquired 3PL fulfillment provider Tailored Services based in New Jersey. Tailored provide warehousing, transportation, and multi-channel fulfillment services with distribution centers located around major West and East Coast ports. Wasson will add 350 employees and 11 DCs with 2.9 million square feet of space to its logistics footprint in the U.S. It also expects to use Tailored's existing automation investments to improve e-commerce fulfillment times. And Tesla CEO Elon Musk has confirmed its next gigafactory will be built in Monterrey, Mexico, about 136 miles from the Texas-Mexico border. Musk made the announcement during the company's Investor Day yesterday, confirming nearly 5 months of speculation about the location of the factory. Musk did not say what vehicles will be produced at the site or when it will be open, but he did mention the intent to expand production at all existing factories while building out the gigasite in Mexico. The investment will create up to 6,000 jobs in Monterrey and will potentially be a battery production site for the automaker. And you can find details of these stories and more on FreightWaves.com and the FreightWaves app. And if you're watching live on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like and subscribe for the full FreightWaves TV experience. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com. We'll take a short break. Be back right after this.
Do you want to watch the weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Good morning. Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I'm Christian Thomas. This is the Social Roundabout. We take a look at what's trending on social media. Now, one video that started trending on TikTok recently, Kelly Nick showed me this video. I think it's pretty funny, especially a different way to occupy your time when you're stuck in traffic. Let's take a look at this unique way this person decided to occupy his time.
Jeremy, you bullshit.
Yeah, I had thought about busting a move here whenever we came back to me, but I don't believe the FreightWaves community is ready for that at the moment. But I bet you the FreightWaves community is ready for an Anthony breakdance. And what do you think, Anthony? You think you can break dance like that on top of the bed of a trailer?
Fun fact to all of our viewers watching right now, every time we go on break, we just start dancing until we get back. So forever out of breath, that's what's going on.
I'm not part of that.
But coming up right now, we're going to have our very own Joanna Marsh joining us for our next segment. Joanna, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So, Joanna, jumping into it, we're talking about some rail topics here. We're going to talk about what are the top safety concerns for rail and how some of those failures come about. Well, I'm starting it off with hotboxing. Can you tell us about what that is and really what are going to be some of the causes and preventions when we're looking at rail safety?
Let's see. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm still kind of like processing the last segment about the dancing. We need to like start off with like a funny. I'm just saying it right now because yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
Well, the funny thing. Sorry, we're going to talk about rail safety in a moment. The funny thing is that I'm actually certified to be a Zumba instructor. Fun fact. And so we could have a dance party sometime.
Well, this kind of gives a lot more, I think, credence to Kaylee's suggestion of having a FreightWaves talent show. So I think coming up sometime soon, we might have to just do a FreightWaves Now talent show edition.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've heard actually some of the editorial members were in bands before. So just giving you a little tip there. So
I think we're ready for that.
Anyway. I'm sorry, you're talking about rail safety. Can you repeat the question again?
Oh, of course. So when we're looking at the rail industry and we're looking at safety concerns and really ways to prevent it and some of the top concerns, what are going to be some of the things top of mind? Knowing hotboxing is one of them. What are really the, I guess, key points around that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of stuff happening right now about rail safety. Of course, there's always been a lot of stuff happening, but just the other day, there's just been a lot of announcements coming out of from the Federal Railroad Administration and from the Senate, and so that's kind of why I'm a little scattered this morning because I'm just trying to process everything. But to start off with the hotbox detectors, so the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, put out a safety advisory the other day asking the railroads to look at their program in terms of like the hotbox detectors program. So what is that? So it's wayside detectors. So it's like devices that are on the side of the track that can that sort of inspect the train in a way as it's moving along. And so these hotbox detectors kind of look at the temperature of wheel bearings, and so the idea is with the safety advisory, you know, and I think just broadly in general with the investigation into the derailment and just how to deploy hotbox detectors, you know. How do you, I guess several things. One is like, how do you best utilize that technology? Are the temperature thresholds sufficient enough to you know, do you know, the hotbox detectors are meant to alert the train crew if they need to stop the train. So what can be done operationally, or in terms of just the technology itself, to ensure that happens, so you know another East Palestine doesn't happen again. So you have that, and then you also have the question about like the spacing of the detectors along the track, and then you also have the question about you know, are they being properly inspected? You know, how, you know, looking at the inspection operations for it. So there's just kind of looking at different issues, kind of looking at the human factors and also the technology. And also the hotbox detectors provide data, and is there a way to utilize that data? So that's going on with the hotbox detectors anyway.
Joanna, looking at this situation in East Palestine, where we had the derailment there, obviously there have been derailments in the past. This one seems to have gotten a lot more legs to it in terms of its attention than others that have happened in the past. Safety obviously was a huge part of this, with a failure of the bearing, at least so far as the NTSB investigation has come out with. Has any other aspect of safety kind of gotten a microscope looked on it? Because obviously, you know, conceivably, this would be the thing that will be fixed and it will be fine. But the next instance will probably be something different. Are there any other issues that are being looked at in terms of safety for the overall train, notwithstanding, of course, what caused the derailment in East Palestine?
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of two things, you know, again, so the FRA and the Department of Transportation and, you know, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, I can't pronounce his name right now. You know, they're all kind of putting out these recommendations and advisories, and I feel like a lot of them are kind of addressing that tension between technology and technology versus human inspections, and that's been an ongoing debate within the rail industry, is like how to balance those two things. Of course, the unions obviously want to ensure that, you know, that no one gets let go or something. It's the union's intention to keep the workers and of course make sure that they're safe. But then you also have these technological advances, like besides the wayside detectors, there's also automatic track inspection, or not automatic, I'm sorry, automated track inspection, which equipment is used, equipment with technology to inspect the track, with the idea that the technology can find vulnerabilities or cracks that might not be discernible necessarily to the human eye. So I think the industry has been facing, and that's actually kind of that discussion is actually going on right now as well, with the FRA. Saying that they have actually their own equipment for automated track inspection, and they want to use it on the Norfolk Southern route around East Palestine, as well as other train routes that have high hazard flammable trains, running through. And so the broader question again is, that tension, like how do you go about, deploying this technology and the human inspections? Do you keep the human inspections at the same level and use that technology to enhance the human inspections, or do you kind of prioritize the inspections using technology, and then sort of have the human inspections kind of supplement or kind of not secondary, but just making the technology a priority. And that's just a debate that's been going on for a while, but with this accident seems to have sort of amplified and sort of increased talk about what to do.
And Joanna, speaking of rail, can you tell us a little bit about PSR before we let you go?
Sure, PSR. Okay, so it's interesting because so there's some debate about how PSR is all related to this. So the unions will say, because of PSR, precision scheduled railroading, which was a tool that the railroads used to sort of streamline operations. One effect of PSR is that it reduced the workforce because you're trying to create more efficiencies within the network, and so a lot of the workforce actually was reduced by about 30% or so over the last 3 or 4 years. Part of it too was also COVID related, but that operational change kind of brought that about. So the unions are saying now that with fewer people involved, that's also fewer human resources who are able to inspect properly the track and to inspect other elements such as the hotbox detectors. There are those who are in the railroads who argue that some of these accidents that happen, the cause might not have been something that you could see with the human eye. Actually, including East Palestine, some have been saying that the fault might not have been detected. It's not something you could detect in the visual inspection. So again, it goes back to that whole question of technology versus human inspections, and which do you keep them both at the same level? Do you prioritize one over the other? And I guess related to that, with PSR, the railroads are trying to increase their headcount levels, but they're still not at the levels actually of before the pandemic, or they're just right at the pandemic levels, but it's still not above. So yeah, there's just a lot happening, and I'll be busy for the next several days.
Absolutely. Joanna, thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thank you.
All right, we will take a quick break and we'll come back with more right after this.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
To an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Wasson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. And Donnie really talked about this on the volume side, breaking it down by the mileage band. Now we're going to break down the mileage band by rejection rates by that same mileage band. But not too much positive stuff on the rejection front.
Concerning, but understandable. Because what do we say when rejection rates are right around 4% or less? That tells us that spot rates are less than contracted rates. They're far less right now. So this is right in what we're in line with what we preach with our rejection rates. Now, look at this red one here. This tells a story. The red one is the tweener haul. The tweener haul one is different. It's actually a KPI for the freight market. Typically, in that 600 to 750, 800 mileage range, those loads just aren't as good for carriers because it might be about a day and a half to run them because of the new hours of service, and it might take about 2 days. You get there, you leave in the morning, you get there at 10, 11 o'clock at night. Well, then you gotta, of course, take your break, but still, it might be the next morning before you get unloaded. So it's really pushing it to a 2-day run from when you actually pick up, and that's really hurting the efficiency of these carriers. So those are typically rejected at a higher rate than any of the other mileage bands. So you'll always see it, like up here, a pretty good gap between the other mileage bands and the tweener haul. Well, as you see through here, as we come through, I should have backed up a bit further, but as we came through October, November, those gaps were narrowing. And of course, you get here, it's getting really narrow. And what this is telling us is like, look, we're trying to run everything that we can. You know what? I'm just going to have to, I need more. So I'm just going to take these tweener hauls and that's why their acceptance rates are going up, and the rejection rate is going down. And that tells us that the freight market is weak. Otherwise, they'd be rejecting these more because they can.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's an efficiency thing because, you're talking that, 500 to 800 mile range, somewhere in there where it's pushing it to make it in a day. Probably not going to happen unless you are running wide open and you're not going through any traffic, right? But the second you hit any traffic, it's shot. That
Denver to Kansas City. There's not a lot of those where there's 500 miles of almost a runway.
Whereas you look here in this darker blue line, right? Our long haul, that 800 plus mile run. Well, why are they rejected less? Well, when you accept them, you know that it's going to take probably 2 days at least, right? Like you know that going in but you're not stopping to unload. You're making your pickup or your appointment on both ends pretty easy. It makes life just a little easier than
they like the long hauls, and the driver likes the long hauls. The driver gets a better paycheck that week. So you can also break these down by city again. So you can put TOTRI.CHI for Chicago, CHA for Chattanooga, ATL for Atlanta. So remember, you can break this down. So if you're looking like Detroit, we saw volume spike in Detroit. We all jumped in like, what's going on in Detroit? It was local. So, and that, if people were sending stuff and they're like, hey, Detroit's spiking, I'm going to get me a good long haul. It wasn't there. So you can always break these down by markets, and that would be a great idea to do.
And that's how you can figure out what's really happening in the market, right? You can see the volume changes overall. Like you mentioned, Detroit, it jumped up like 15% a week. Well, why? Well, there was like a 20% increase in short haul or like that local length of haul, whereas long haul or even tweener haul are on the decline. So it's one thing to definitely pay attention to.
All right, let's jump into our next chart here, and we'll kind of see, we're a little bit behind here, but the next chart here, this is LOTRI, rejection rates, and the volumes. So you can put this into a map as well to go ahead and see visually where these markets are. Where are the long haul freight? Well, if you look, volumes, we're looking at the shade, Tony. So this is Ontario, LAX, got a lot of volumes, very, very low rejection rates. Denver, lots of volumes. The rejection rates are headed up, but since the rejection rates are so low, that one's still a darker blue, so rejection rates are pretty high in Denver right now for long haul. Laredo, Houston, Fort Worth, Dallas, you see a lot of shade there. That's where some of your long hauls are. Now remember, this is one of those central states like Omaha. 800 miles, you got to go a ways to get 800 miles. So you either got to go pretty much all the way to get to the long haul range. So either West Coast, I'm not sure, maybe Dallas to Denver might be too short, but Laredo to into Denver might be long enough. So we see a lot of these good markets here. This will tell you where the long hauls are. Charlotte, North Carolina, you probably got some furniture coming out of there.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Bill and Anthony.
And welcome to our community segment. And right now we're going to have Thomas Wasson, our enterprise expert, trucking expert, and he is going to be the one heading up, of course, Loaded and Rolling, one of the most entertaining and informative shows we have here at FreightWaves. Thomas, thanks for joining us this morning.
Pleasure to be on. I was partying hard last night at 1:15 after a tornado warning, but luckily my house was not attractive enough, so we live to talk another day.
Well, I am glad to hear that, and I'm glad that you're able to join us here safely and dryly as well. So, Thomas, when we're jumping into this highlight here, what are you looking at right now? Fear and Loathing on the operations floor was the title of this segment. What are we getting into?
Well, I always love to give back, and some of my experiences in truckload operations come from a large enterprise carrier. So normally when you see the down cycle, the downward part of the market, things can get really entertaining. Now, when there's too much freight, different actors usually end up yelling at each other. But when there's too little freight, you can see very interesting behaviors, especially from carriers now that they've lost their pricing power. So, you know, large carriers, the mentality with your freight is filling the bucket. Let's say I run 7,000 loads per week, and we talk about OTVI and OTRI rejections and tender volumes. You know, that rejection rate of like 2 or 3% actually can trickle down into other interesting characteristics, which is now instead of 7,000 loads a week that I'm supposed to be getting relatively consistently, now I'm down to 6,000 loads per week. Now I have to fill the bucket more with spot market freight. And one of the other challenges is this turns into like a snowball effect, where basically not only are the main lanes that you're used to getting within your truckload network tendered from customers, but the customers themselves will often instead either stick to commitment or give you the excuse that they don't have enough product or inventory levels, and in fact put it back on the spot market for you to bid on later for a steep discount. So it's fascinating to watch because, you know, brokers and shippers, they have their own ways of operating in this kind of environment. But for a carrier, you wonder why spot rates can fall so fast or continue falling past the point of no return. Well, it's kind of like a fire going out. A large carrier will take that load at $1.25 a mile, while a small carrier maybe can only operate, if you look at ATRI data, it's now like $2.25 or something like that. It used to be $1.75. So costs have definitely gone up. But at the end of the day, when you have scale, 5,000 trucks on the road, you can get away with it because you just simply need to keep them moving due to economies of scale.
Thomas, we've talked a lot about, you and I have talked a lot in the past about how sometimes even when, you know, the volumes are low, the big guns, the big carriers still get the lion's share, and much more so perhaps as perhaps owner-operators start to leave the market there as well. Taking it from the opposite perspective, what is it that the large carriers can do now that could possibly even really exacerbate the situation with volumes as low as they are right now?
My favorite term to do that is called "don't look, just book." What that means is going to be sales. You're going to be soliciting customers that you decided to take out of your network that you no longer liked. Maybe you had that large national tire company that hoarded all your trailers and you dropped them 3 years ago. Well, now is a perfect time to knock on their door and say, hey, do you have any freight that I could use in my network? So we're going to see a situation where you're making sacrifices on the customer mix and the quality. But also you're going to see with carriers, you're going to see deals with brokerages. And unfortunately for most brokers, when I used to be a load planner, your committed freight still comes first. So if you mess up on your tractor availability, let's say that in a specific market, like Donnie talked about earlier in the carrier update, what if Atlanta, you had 10 trucks needing a load? I teach math as well sometimes. And it turns out that you can get 5 loads more from your customer's internal load board and you get 5 loads from the broker. You'd think, okay, well, I've relatively evened out my load balance. Well, now it turns out that 2 of those 10 trucks had bad data. So now I have 2 more loads than I have trucks. Well, I promise you the loads that are going to get handed back or rolled to the next day are the brokerage loads. Ironically enough, for the broker, you would say, well, why doesn't the broker stop this behavior? Well, the sweet, sweet scion of fat margins is why. A national carrier can sometimes get you hundreds, 50, 100, 200 extra dollars per load, when your average margin per load for a successful brokerage is normally around $150 to $250 per load in a positive environment. Now, if you have like a high margin lane or a high volume lane, maybe you're making 50 to 100 tops. Or if you have a high margin out of network lane, maybe you're like $300. But the rule of thumb is generally between 150 to 250. So it's fascinating to see. I guess to kind of summarize it, what a large carrier is going to do is just simply gobble up more freight to the detriment of owner operators who don't really have the access, or if they do have the access, you can't compete on rate. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, while brokerages are built on relationships, the relationships go both ways. You don't have a very successful brokerage if you can't make money off of it.
And Thomas, when we're looking at, of course, this is a highlight on your community for Loaded and Rolling. What are we looking at in the most recent episode in terms of content and interviews?
So it's been kind of a slow news week, but it wasn't slow getting to interview Guru Rao with NewViz. He's CEO and founder of the company. Amazing guy to talk to. This one was sustainability and last mile, and people will say, well, Thomas, there's no enterprise carriers in last mile. Well, thankfully, dear listener, the fundamentals of truckload operation at last mile, middle mile, and whatever part of the first mile you want to talk about are relatively the same, which is optimization and reducing of empty miles and the reduction of waste. Now, this usually last mile heavily involves like LTL movements as well as weights involved, parcels and such. But theoretically speaking, the end goals are going to be, of course, the same, which is trying to identify how much, if you're doing scope 3 emissions, how much you actually contributed, which is amazing. Guru is one of the second or third person I've talked to about how people keep talking about scope 3 with the upcoming rule changes proposed by the SEC on reporting basically, hey, what's the environment going to do to you? What are you going to do to the environment? What should investors know? And so now investors really want to know, especially if you're a large shipper, what is my supply chain? Well, there's the problem, because for a lot of these customers that don't have a private fleet of their own trucks, it's really hard to find out what everybody's doing and how much carbon emissions. So I guess the TLDR is right now, no one's really coalesced on a single way of quantifying it. There is a European standard that I've heard floated around. There's some people who are trying to calculate your emissions from the truck tank to the exhaust pipe in terms of actual emissions for miles traveled. There's some people trying to calculate the emissions from where it was drilled and when it reached the fueling pump. So it's kind of a double whammy. I guess you could get an ESG score on where you fueled at based on their ESG. Kind of feels like a pyramid scheme, doesn't it? And then you can have your own ESG efficiency score based on how well you hold the item and stuff. So the jury is still out. People are thinking that like I suddenly need to know it. We're seeing people like the folks at NewViz, who's a route optimization technology company, as well as some other folks trying to chew through this question, because if you figure out how to do it successfully, there's a good opportunity to gain more business, because a lot of carriers really just don't want to deal with it, or they're not publicly traded, so they don't have to.
Gotcha. Thomas, our enterprise trucking experts, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
All right, Thomas Wasson joining us live here from just down the street, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, he does the dance parties during the breaks as well. But you can also catch Loading and Rolling here on FreightWaves TV, and that's going to be live on Tuesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern or Pacific Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be sure to tune in for that as well. Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call, Check Call, Check Call, Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I am not Thomas Wasson. I'm Christian Thomas, and this is the Social Roundabout. You know what? We like to goof around here, as you can tell. And so this TikToker, he's getting a little famous for goofing around at work. He's a meteorologist out in Houston, Texas. Let's take a look at what he's getting trendy for. He's putting in Friends references in his forecast. Let's take a watch.
List. You want Friends references? I'll give you a bunch of them. Challenge accepted.
We've got some Arctic air that's going to pivot around it, going south at first, but then it will pivot, and it will pivot off to the east. So while we're in t-shirts and shorts, people up here are like, could I be wearing any more clothes? Later on today, there might be a nubbin or two on the radar. We've had warm stretches like this before, and then a late season freeze comes in like we were on a break. Spring, how you doing? It's already here, it feels like. That's only 11% of the time. So it's not that common. It doesn't happen every year, and it is a big deal.
Yeah, like I said, he's goofing around a bit, and he's getting trendy because he's doing multiple different things. You can go on his TikTok there and suggest something, and he'll put some references out there, and maybe we convince Kaylee Nix to do a couple of these whenever she does weather here. I don't know. But that's it for the Social Roundabout. We're going to pivot over to Anthony and Bill.
You know, Bill, that's what I would imagine Thomas Wasson to be like if he was a meteorologist.
Yeah, yeah.
100%. But
they're a little bit more corny.
maybe. But this is something we have to talk about real quick is our upcoming virtual event. So coming up shortly, we're going to have our very own virtual event for Supply Chain Meets FinTech. That's going to be coming up on March 15th. And so that's a little bit later on this month, and it's absolutely free. And once you register, you get a chance to get one of our door prizes. So that's going to be a great time. And if by chance you missed the State of Freight webinar with our very own founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, and our head of Freight Market Intelligence, Zach Strickland, two big names in terms of freight supply chain and really knowing what's going on. You can catch that again and watch that on demand because there is tons of great information in that. Right now, we're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in the freight market and a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
The weirdest show in freight? Catch your Nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
And welcome back to the second hour of FreightWaves Now. Here are your 10 o'clock headlines. Freight forwarder Wasson Logistics has acquired 3PL fulfillment provider Tailored Services based in New Jersey. Tailored provides warehousing, transportation, and multi-channel fulfillment services with distribution centers located around major West and East Coast ports. Wasson will take and add 350 employees and 11 DCs with 2.9 million square feet of space to its logistics footprint in the U.S. It also expects to use Tailored's existing automation investments to improve e-commerce fulfillment times. And Tesla CEO Elon Musk has confirmed its next gigafactory will be built in Monterrey, Mexico, about 136 miles from the Texas-Mexico border. Musk made the announcement at the company's investor day yesterday, confirming nearly 5 months of speculation about the location of the factory. Musk did not say what vehicles would be produced at the site or when it will open, but he did mention the intent to expand production at all existing factories while building out the gigasite in Mexico. The investment will create up to 6,000 jobs in Monterrey and will potentially be a battery production site for the automaker. Software as a service provider Descartes has released its latest industry outlook and remained cautious, but reiterated its long-term outlook to an upswing later in the year. The company released its earnings as well as reporting per share increases of 34 cents for the 2023 fiscal fourth quarter ending January 31st. This number was 12 cents higher year over year. Revenue increased 11% year over year to $125 million, with gross margin expanding 100 basis points to 77%. However, the strength of the U.S. dollar took its toll on the company, negatively impacting revenues by $3 million. President Joe Biden has named 25 members to sit on a Presidential Export Council, a committee that offers insight into how government policies impact U.S. trade performance. And one of those members is FedEx CEO Raj Subramaniam. Subramaniam became FedEx's CEO last year after a dramatic operational change, and is under his leadership, his company has started major overhauls of its costly operational modes. The council will be chaired by Washington businessman Mark D. Ein, and other members include Rosalind Brewer, former CEO of Starbucks and CEO of Sam's Club, plus other experts from labor, real estate, national security, and law firms. And French fulfillment provider Stacy has completed its acquisition of Atlanta-based Amware Fulfillment LLC, which provides direct-to-consumer fulfillment from 15 U.S. facilities. The financial terms were not described, but both were not disclosed. But both companies remain privately held. The combined company will operate 81 fulfillment centers, 18 in the United States and 63 across the UK and Europe, totaling 9.8 million square feet. The entity will continue to operate as Amware Fulfillment, with Stacy's existing facilities in New Jersey, Tennessee, and Nevada becoming part of the integrated American network. And you can find details of these stories and more on FreightWaves.com and on the FreightWaves app. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. For the full FreightWaves TV experience, head over to tv.freightwaves.com. Now over to the wall for our next carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update. And Donnie, we're going to start something we haven't looked at in a little while, but we've seen lead times tick up. I mean, they're right at 3 days. Been trending higher really since the beginning. I mean, you see it trend up in the middle of every month into the back half of the month. I think that's not a surprise because, I mean, it happens literally every month because shippers want to get things off their docks before the end of the month.
And they're under a little bit of pressure.
Yep.
And this is telling us, so, and we kind of looked at this a few weeks ago, shippers have been under a little bit of pressure. Mm-hmm. But yet, carriers can't push these rates back up. And I think there's a couple reasons why. Number one is these mega carriers are just accepting everything, which is pushing less to the spot market. But at the same time, with less going to the spot market, they're still fighting over that and having to keep their rates down. But, you know, are these mega carriers servicing the loads they're all accepting?
Yeah.
Are some of those failing and these guys jumping back out and saying, hey, I need to book this today, which is same day or 1 day out, versus they could have done it 2 or 3 days out like normal.
Yeah.
So we see a little bit of pressure here, but these carriers still are not able to push back and push spot market rates up. We saw it. We saw rejection rates bounce back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's this just kind of shows how much control shippers are having over carriers in negotiating power. And even though when things do get maybe a little bit under pressure for shippers, the carriers still can't fight back.
I think what's interesting about this, I mean, I'm looking back here, you got Labor Day, right? That's really in the back since really August, right? You get Christmas and Thanksgiving there, obviously causes surges, but you see every holiday, you see this little uptick. Well, look at where we are in relation to where we peaked out. I mean, we're talking like less than a tenth of a day, so just an hour or two difference from a holiday where we were down at, I mean, it's not, again, it's not huge moves either direction, but it's still elevated compared to near a holiday level.
It's a trend that we should wonder why, and this should be reasons for everybody on the spot market to say, hey, we need to get together and push some of these rates up in some areas. Yeah. But it's not happening because they're fighting like vultures over the food.
And this is an area why, if you want to look at why the PPI really hasn't changed a whole lot, is everything says it should be lower, right? Except this. I mean, this is one of those areas that obviously spot rate declines, that rate has slowed down, volumes are pretty stable, rejections are where they're at, but you see this and it's like, it could flip back. You mean, if they work together, you could push rates up. And
how about this, Tony? We expected spot rates to be much lower than what they are probably right now.
Exactly.
Did this maybe hold or slow the decline?
Yeah.
To where they're still 15, 20 cents above where we thought they would be at this time? Because honestly, I thought we would see the big fallout by February.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
While it did slowly go down, they kind of held steady, kind of, 1 or 2 cents here, week 2, 1 or 2 cents. This could be the reason why as well.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, let's go to the next chart. So we're looking at outbound. We're looking at breaking this down by drive-in and reefer. So when we look at it here, we see reefer's in the purple here. Reefer has been easing a little bit, but it's still at 4.35 days. Its average is normally right around that 4 to 4.2. So it's a little bit elevated, but the pressure is easing.
Yep.
So if you're in the reefer, not so much right now. Now there is produce that ships year-round, and we're starting to get the very beginning of the peak season for like Central and South America.
Yep.
Some of that will move up. And we'll see a little bit, but that's not going to be enough to move the scales very much. Now, as we get into to mid-March, a little bit on, you'll see a little bit coming across maybe the Laredo border. And maybe some more coming in through Miami, maybe some melons starting to come out of the Miami market. So keep an eye there, but how much will those scales tip?
Yeah, and some of the interesting part about that is it spot market, direct to spot market, right? Where it's not going to show up as a lead time because it's probably same day pickup. That's the nuances dealing with produce, right? It's not regular.
Right, but what it can do is it can take away all the other capacity
and put pressure
and the ones
right here.
And the ones that we're measuring, you'll see these days going out further because they know if they don't get that truck, then the produce markets might. Because produce is, like you said, it's a lot of times it's same day. And you pay a higher rate, and there's a lot more of a risk, and then it may not show up in this data,
but it shows up.
It affects the rest of capacity.
Yep, because they're pulling capacity from the broader market to cover those loads.
And real quick here, boom, this is drive-in.
Yep.
Drive-in's the one where we've seen the push
trend.
on.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you one more time before the end of the show. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Bill and Anthony.
All right, thank you very much, guys. And joining us is our next guest, straight off of a plane, I think, coming back into the Chicago area. Matthew Leffler joins us, the armchair attorney. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, so this is an interesting subject and that we're going to be talking about, which is, of course, fallout from a major transportation disaster, if you will. Now, we don't necessarily have to refer to, obviously, the one in East Palestine, Ohio, but just to clear the air here for a second, that we're just talking about a disaster in general, an accident in general. So we're not giving you the opportunity to quote unquote give legal advice, which of course you're not doing. So that being said, let's say a bad thing happens in a populated community or a rural community. What does the company, the transportation provider, what do they have to look for in terms of what could be coming after them in from a legal perspective, from injuries that may have been sustained in and around that area?
This is what we call toxic tort litigation or mass tort litigation. It is incredibly complicated legal proceedings when essentially attorneys from all over the country race to the disaster site and try to start signing up plaintiffs to go after the organization that is ultimately on the hook for the liability. It might be a couple cases, it might be a couple dozen cases, and it's a race to see who can get what we call class certification to make it a class action lawsuit. Over time, these cases might be consolidated by a federal judge or a state judge to make sure that we are litigating everything in one particular case. But this is what happens when you have catastrophic events. The story goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so what ends up happening is you get attorneys from all over the country racing in, and then people pushing back on regulations and safety and all the different things that we care about as an industry.
And Matthew, when things like these happen, how difficult is it to really kind of separate those that were truly impacted by this and those that are potentially bad actors looking to just kind of capitalize on the moment?
The impact is interesting. What are the damages? In civil litigation, we're not talking about making you better. It's about giving you money. And what type of damages do you have? Is it things like nausea or headaches or actual chemical burns on your hands or your body? Is it your property values? If you're in a disaster site like this, chances are you're not going to be able to sell your home. And if you try to sell your home or try to buy into that community, many bankers aren't going to lend you money. So there's economic damages that are just as pervasive as the physical injuries that people face. And these things don't just start with a day. It takes weeks, months, years, even decades to fully understand the impact on the community, the properties, and also the health of the people involved.
From a corporate perspective, obviously, companies that are involved in these kinds of accidents have to be aware. Now they have to have their head on a swivel because they could be coming from virtually any direction. But what kind of action, I mean, obviously you're expecting anything, but what kind of action are you really kind of looking out for, especially when someone's going to view you at fault for whatever happened?
Well, you first have the regulatory agencies. What are the regulators telling you to do? They will say you have to do X, Y, and Z, and you have to do it in this form or fashion. If you don't do it, the regulator can come in and say, I'll do it for you, and you'll pay triple the damages. You'll pay triple my cost to do this. For the industry, as it looks at individual plaintiffs, this is exactly what they understand and expect. This is not new. In the United States, we have about 1,000 derailments a year. So it's not like this is a very rare circumstance. Now, the case in Ohio is a little bit different. So it's a much bigger ordeal at the moment. But they all expect the plaintiff's attorneys to come out. And the attorneys are usually not paid anything except for a part of the overall winnings or the earnings they get from the case, usually about 1/3. So a lawyer in this case can make a ton of money, whereas the people that are injured are just trying to be made whole, cover my medical bills, cover my therapy, cover my property values that are decreasing, or cover the economic impact on the business that no longer has people coming to it because of this horrible accident.
And Matthew, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes these things can take, months, years, and decades. What are some of the cases where maybe there was a settlement reached, but then maybe a few years later you find out, there were other damages I didn't realize that I took on. Maybe it was health damage that wasn't really kind of presenting itself at the time. Are there any actions or any moves that person or that party has to make?
Well, usually you get one bite at the apple. So when you go after, you want to make sure you're exhaustive of the things you're looking to recover. But we've seen cases like this. There's 1982 in Louisiana had the same sort of chemical spill. Tens of millions of dollars were paid out over 30 years, and there was monitoring going on at that town for over 30 years. What ends up likely happening is a big consolidation and a fund gets established, and people can make claims on the fund. We saw that in 2010 with the BP oil spill as one way. But the reality is you might never be made whole. You might never recover all of the things that happened to you. And so it's important to be in line and make sure that you're having your voice heard. You can go with obviously attorneys help you do those things, but being proactive in your community and talking with the people that are out there today. I mean, we're seeing people that are working on these disaster sites. They don't know what they're being exposed to necessarily. Maybe the PPE isn't enough or isn't sufficient. So we have to be very mindful that these things over time will continue to develop, and likely the company will be on the hook for a lot of those continuing expenses as the time goes on.
Matthew, is there any difference between an accident where, say, for instance, there's nothing like a spill or like, say, for instance, if you have a train derailment and no hazard material was on the train, there's no threat of poison, for instance, if you think of it that way, versus if there is hazardous material on a plane or on a train or on a, like you said, an oil spill. The fault of the derailment wasn't necessarily the fact that there was hazardous material on it, because there was a fault with the train itself. Is there any difference between those two correlations as to what the train is carrying or what the mode of transportation is carrying as opposed to the accident itself?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of the liability you face, if you're responsible for the derailment, whether that's through some sort of event that takes place and the asset is now damaged or whatever, your liability doesn't really change, but the damages do. The damages do. If you have a train that's hauling something that's completely benign, let's just say cereal or something, you're not going to have property values in the surrounding community depreciate. You're not going to have a burn-off event where you have to destroy all the cereal because it's so dangerous. It's when you have these types of things that can have lasting impacts on the community or the environment or the people, then your damages go up. But liability is the first thing you have to establish. Is there a duty? Was the duty breached? Was there some sort of negligence involved? Once you establish that, then you move on to damages. And in things that aren't hazardous, the damages aren't that significant typically. But in the case of hazardous materials, the damages are pervasive and hard to know and require a ton of additional work over time.
Matthew, when we start to see, a lot of media attention, does that give a little bit more likelihood to any type of, sweeping changes in the industry, or does that really not play too much of a role? Is it just more so the significance, whether it does get a lot of attention or not?
As I said when I opened up, a crisis shouldn't be put to waste. Everybody was pushing for things like paid sick leave for people on the rails. The rail companies immediately capitulated. Yes, we'll do that now. What we're seeing is states like Ohio passing laws trying to have two-person crews involved with these cases. That might actually be counter to what is on the federal system. So there's federal laws that have been promulgated right now. So ultimately, I think that when you have a disaster, everyone says, how can we take this disaster and advance our political goals? And when you have these things, that is exactly what every player does. I don't think you're going to see anything other than massive sweeping changes in the industry, or at least a lot of talk of those things, likely a lot of litigation as to what really caused it. Because, again, we're looking at the one in East Palestine when it comes to a wheel bearing failure. Wheel bearings fail all the time, but it depends on what you're carrying as to what ultimate damages you see. But we are seeing a ton of activity on the state level, on the federal level, and through the union activities of the people that are involved to try to change some of the things that happen in the industry. And if those things happen, it likely makes the movement of rail a little bit more expensive, but certainly not as expensive as other parts of the supply chain.
Matthew, real quick, does this scene in New Palestine, Ohio, seem like it's going to be one of those things that's going to last for decades as far as legal concerns are made?
Absolutely, 100%. There's absolutely no way you can go out there and say to people, we know exactly the level of damages. We have reports allegedly of workers feeling headaches and migraines, so there might be some workers' compensation issues that'll develop over time. We see massive law firms coming in, dozens of lawsuits, hundreds of plaintiffs looking for class certification, and this will likely be some form of like a super fund. In my opinion, I think that's what we're likely to see over time. And then what happens to the property values? These are business owners, these are homeowners, and they have really very little options. People are not going to come and say, I want to buy your house so you can leave. So I do think that this will be something that we'll be following for at least 3 decades. Honestly, the EPA will be monitoring these things for decades, and we'll be looking at, how this impacts the greater community over time. My hope is that it's very minor for everybody involved, and it's not some catastrophic event for people's health and well-being, but we don't know yet. It's very early in the place. It's only 1 month ago so far.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us and shedding some light and insight into the industry. We'll be sure to follow up with you as this develops.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome into this week's On the Spot. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by the one and only Zach Strickland. Zach, how's it going?
Going well, Tony. Glad to be here.
Hey, you know, you've had a busy week between the State of Freight webinar. You're going to have a roundtable coming up a little while, but we're going to put you on the spot today. This is a topic that I know I've mentioned to you a couple weeks ago. This is a chart I found that I thought was quite interesting just because it's right now, stable freight environment for the most part, right? I mean, demand's pretty stable, rejections are near their bottom. So like trying to find things that are really interesting and that could drive changes in the overall freight market. I found this chart. It's our intermodal contract savings index. So it's the percent difference between our drive-in, or it's basically the discount that intermodal contract rates provide compared to the drive-in. Right now, we're at 10.5%. I've got a white line here. It's kind of hard to see this average line over the past 5 years. The average is right at 15%. So we're at 10.5, average is 15. What do you think just looking at this one chart, what do you think overall this means, and kind of explain why we might be at such a discount here, or why the discount's as narrow as it's been, dating back really to 2022 or 2020?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things here, and we've heard Mike Bowden-Distel talk about it quite a bit. And one of the things is the fact that intermodal rates move slower than your standard truckload rates. Truckload contract rates have been moving at an accelerated pace since the pandemic started back in 2020. And first one was going up, so that they rose, and so that expanded. That's why you see this huge expansion right here. There in the beginning. Actually, it was right in 2021. You saw that huge rise. And then intermodal caught wind and basically raised their rates along with it, but it was at a much slower pace. And now we've seen truckload contracts really take a dive. We're dropped about 13-14% over the last 7-8 months. And intermodal rates, like I said, move very slowly when we're talking about this. So I think the idea here, and I think you're right in your premise, is that this is going to start to creep back higher because intermodal has now got pricing pressure on it. People are easily able to attain that truckload capacity. And intermodal, of course, they struggle with service. They've been criticized for not being able to capture market share during the pandemic because their service levels were bad. And it's not necessarily because the rails were slow. It's the stuff around the rails, the drayage, the ports, operational congestion factors there.
Yeah, for sure. We'll bring up the next chart that just brings both the intermodal and the van contract rate up on this next chart. And I think the interesting, like you said, they move slower. I think year to date, contract rates on the van side down about 8%, on the intermodal side down around 4%. So, I mean, you're talking twice as fast on the van side. But what's interesting is you hear management teams at some of these largest intermodal players, right? Talk about a lot of their freight is bid in the first half. I think upwards of 75% of their bid is in the first half of the year. But then their expectations are that intermodal pricing is going to hold up better than truckload, which I think that's the one that is a little interesting because you're bidding against an environment where your discount that you provide, or what you would think is at the narrowest it's been, your rates really haven't adjusted to the truckload. Yes, truckload on a year-over-year basis probably looks a lot worse, and I think that's what they're talking about to the analysts. But they're still they're under pricing pressure, and I think that's what's going to be interesting how it plays out, because now shippers are going to have the ability, and this kind of goes into my thinking, is this an opportunity for truckload market to see some demand? Because if you think about it, intermodal demand really hasn't suffered the same fate that the truckload market has.
Yeah, I think they do have an argument in the way that truckload rates they have a lot more room to fall. and I think there's a lot more weight on truckload rates in general to fall further down, as we expect them to. I mean, if you just look at the spot rates in the trucking market right now, they're about 20 to 25% lower than the van contract rates right now. So that means they're going to fall, and they're probably going to fall faster. Now, to your point, though, I mean, intermodal contracts, they got downward pressure on them as well. And when you're talking about the ease of service, and you don't have to go through all those middlemen, the drayage providers and those connection points, you don't have that service disruption potential in truckload that you have now in intermodal. It's still not great. So to make that sale, they're going to have to drop their price.
You have to make it worth it, because you have to think about it. The rail's, about a day longer, typically. There's more touch points. There's more opportunity for claims to happen. I mean, there's just these things that happen on the intermodal side which is why it operates at a discount to the truckload market. But when that discount is basically gone, I mean, you're talking 10%, which we looked at it, right? I mean, it's as low as it was in 2020, but it's still, 4 percentage points below the longer term average. It has to revert to the mean at some point. We'll pull up a chart here looking at intermodal volumes versus those loaded intermodal, so both international and domestic versus the truckload. So on a relative scale over the last 6 months. So we're looking truckload down about 15% in the last 6 months, so OTVI. Rail intermodal volumes only down 8%. So that's where, this is where my whole idea is that there is an opportunity for truckload maybe this is kind of this bottoming out that we see. We may not see any further declines, but you may see declines from rail shifting back from intermodal over to truckload. And I think that's going to be what's interesting as it plays out here in the next few months.
Yeah. There's plenty of room on the truckload market. And the thing that intermodal does have going for it is that a lot of it depends on these large shippers with large infrastructure that is able to move and handle container freight. It's not necessarily a purely fungible item just to say, all right, now I'm going to do truckload instead of container freight. So that's the one thing that may keep it, because as you can see, rail volumes are much less volatile. They move much less fast or quickly than truckload does.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be something to pay attention to because of just, again, where that discount is currently and how rates are moving. But Zach, thank you so much for joining me on this week's On the Spot. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Wasson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I'm Christian Thomas, and it seems like we're just having a little bit of technical difficulties to get over here to me. I forgot to change this. Anyways, last Tuesday I talked about how Apple's minimizing your carbon footprint by flipping a switch. Well, take a look at this video where this guy is reducing his carbon footprint, delivering a TV he just bought to his house. Let's take a watch.
Dude, I'm with this guy. I have no idea what's going on. Okay. There's actually no way. There is no way he's doing this. Oh my gosh. He's balancing the TV on his... No. Surely there's no way he's gonna do this. On the unicycle. There's no way. There is no way he's doing this right now. Oh, I have to say something. Dude, that's epic! Oh my gosh!
You gotta do what you gotta
do. Yeah, I have no idea how that guy does that. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's inconceivable. Anyway, that does it for my social roundabout. Isaiah Buchanan will be back tomorrow to keep you updated on what's trending on social media. I'm gonna toss it over to Bill Priestley for our roundtable.
And welcome into the roundtable. I think we found new last mile technology.
Yeah, for sure.
That was pretty amazing. Welcome in. We've got a bit of a hodgepodge of topics that we want to get to today. Of course, we've got Zach Strickland joining us, Tony Mulvey here as well, and you got some very interesting feedback from an article over the past weekend. But it was talking about capacity in the market, and I wanted to have you on Monday, but what happened here? And kind of take us through this. You've got a chart to kind of explain what happened.
Yeah. So one of the most common questions that I get asked is how much available capacity is there in the trucking market? Mm-hmm. And I'm constantly like, okay, it doesn't necessarily matter if we have a number or not. So I almost, like tongue-in-cheek, kind of sarcastically wrote this article giving, answering that question based on our contract load accepted volume index, which we can pull up here. And my point is like, if it's 25% or 10% or whatever the number is, the point is that carriers, if you look at the white line there, carriers were accepting 25% more freight at the peak 2021 levels back, in the pandemic era. Mm-hmm. Than they are right now. So that means that they theoretically should be able to handle 25% more freight. There's some length of haul things that you could go into and, the placement of freight and stuff like that. But this is just kind of to get a starting point of how much available capacity there is for accepting freight right now in the contract market. And that was what the article was based on. And apparently, capacity numbers is a polarizing topic. So, and I was really just trying to get kind of a table set for what we can expect moving forward, because whether you think it's 1%, 2%, whatever the number is, we've got a long road ahead of us without some sort of demand side shock to get there.
Yeah. So with that, I guess the real question is the one that you get daily. How much capacity is there in the market?
Yeah, and the truth is that nobody can really know. I mean, you can argue about that number all day long, and you can point to different figures and things, but nobody went out and counted all the trucks and drivers available. Mm-hmm. It does not exist anywhere. You look at FMCSA data is probably the closest thing that we have, and it's admittedly noisy on their end, and it's because there's people that fall out of the market that never tell anybody, and there's people constantly trying to get in and out, and it's a very slow figure. And then even if you have that number, it's hard to match that to demand specifically, because demand comes from, it's a very uneven distribution throughout the United States. And then on top of it, the freight flow is also very uneven.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the FMCSA data, right, it's self-reported data. It's every 2 years, right? If they leave the market, they don't have to tell anybody. I mean, they may just let their insurance lapse, things like that. There's no good way to measure exits in the market, right? The only real way, we see it is bigger carriers going out of business. And like, that's where you really see those capacity changes. And then you see it in the outbound tender reject index, right? And that's where it's going to come from, like when you see these changes happening, where you're starting to see supply and demand become more balanced, right? Because right now we have excess supply to meet the demand needs. Mm-hmm. And it's evident by 3.5% rejection rates. I mean, I think they're lower than any time that I've been here at FreightWaves, and I started back in 2019, and that wasn't a great year for the truckload market. So I think it's going to be, like you said, it is an uneven distribution for demand, right? I mean, large shippers work with large carriers, they work with large brokers, and sometimes these smaller fleets are left out to dry from the freight that's still continuing to move, because you also need to measure like other smaller businesses and like how they're doing too. It's not just one thing or the other to measure. I mean, it's the whole goods economy. How is it doing as a whole? And I mean, that contracted load acceptance volume is one of the best ways to measure that. I mean, we've put it up against real goods adjusted GDP, and it was pretty spot on telling those movements too.
Well, I want to come back to this in just a second, but one of the things the other thing that I wanted to get to was kind of these big fish that make big moves. Sometimes you could say FedEx obviously is in that group. UPS I think is about to be in that group, but Target most recently, announced that they're going to put $100 million into sortation facilities and kind of look like they're morphing into more of an e-commerce thing. Remember when we talked about Target last, was it end of Q1, beginning Q2, and their famous quote, "We underestimated our transportation costs," or something to that effect, as I remember. And now all of a sudden there's massive change here. What do you make of this?
I mean, one, it's the macro environment's changing, right? I mean, we talk about COVID, it kind of pulled everything forward by, say, a decade, and these companies were kind of left. This has kind of been the trend, right? I mean, you saw the emergence of Amazon and the need for the e-commerce and how impactful it's played. Now you look at what Target's doing, they leaned into this premiumization products, right? They're trying to focus really heavily on that, trying to separate themselves from an Amazon or a Walmart, but they're doing similar things that bring that offering to a similar footprint. So I don't think, it's not a surprise, it's just a matter of that $1 billion transportation spend, that was just the nuances of the freight market and the global supply chain crisis that was going on with container prices on the ocean, things like that. This is more of a lean into, hey, this is somewhere where we were headed anyway. It's more of now we're in a place where we can make this investment. It makes sense, and we can still. It's not going to blow out a budget that we have. Like, we're planning on it. And $100 million for Target is a drop in the bucket.
Is this a move that's kind of similar to them not wanting to become the next Blockbuster Video?
Yeah, I think obviously there's that brick and mortar sentiment about it that's present, but Target, I think, found out that it has some vulnerabilities when you talk about e-commerce. I mean, there's obviously a very big player available out there that really can take market share from you, and when people don't want to go out, you have to have that availability. And Target's kind of prided itself on being kind of this higher end retailer that you can go and get goods, get some physical presence. And I think that's the thing they still want to be, but they want to make that online experience as easy as possible when it is present, because that also leads to people going into your store when you have availability online.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were one of the leaders in that buy online, pick up in store, and I think that's a big driver too. Yeah. Of like why they would want to do this. They were almost using their stores as the fulfillment centers. This just gives them the ability to bring in more inventory to get out to the stores too, right? Like it's a sortation. I mean, they can move that into more localized, regionalized. It speeds up that process, that inventory, that backfilling of inventory if they have to. It just kind of gives them another kind of lever to pull when things do change.
All right, well, one other topic I wanted to get to here, and you guys kind of already talked about this a little bit with your on-the-spot segment, but I've heard from different sources, a lot of people trying out when is the bottom of this market coming, and this is where I've heard people say, all right, well, it's hit the bottom in certain areas, it's not hit the bottom in other areas. Best guess, or maybe even if you know, when did this thing or when will this thing hit the bottom? Because we've seen some data that starts to see a little bit of a trickle up. It could fall immediately again tomorrow. Right. But where do you think we're at as far as this entire debate is concerned?
Well, actually, my article, the 25% capacity article, makes a guess, and it puts it out about 10 months into the future that we, technically next winter, really, that we actually do see that bottoming, because that, if you apply supply side capacity movements, whether it increases or decreases, it's very, very slow. So if demand side conditions remain relatively stable, which most of the data says that it's going to remain stable to down, you'll probably have some seasonal, inflection points. We saw it in 2019 with the tender rejection index. You kind of saw this pulse, with the tender rejection rate. It kind of was like blip, 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 towards the end of the year. And I think that's what we're going to see. Like this past Christmas, we saw tender rejection rates at 5.5% at peak. That's not going to happen next Christmas. Yeah. I think the supply side is going to contract, and it will move slowly. It'll be a long year, but I think next winter might actually be, if everything remains the same.
So is the bottoming out those that say that it's kind of at that point now wishful thinking?
I think so. I mean, one of the things, we just did that survey, right, with Joe and about the owner ops, right? They're looking for a rebound at throughout the year, right? In the back half of the year before they decide if they're going to leave the industry. I think that's where it puts it in that 10 months forward, right? The winter of next year or this year. But I think one of the interesting things, pay attention to what happens on the ocean on the demand side, right? Because that we saw it drop for Lunar New Year, came back up to those levels. What happens now after, again, China's reopened from that holiday? What happens then? And then the difference really on the supply side is it was a lot faster to come in this time, but it leaving the market has been a lot slower, and it's gonna probably continue to be slower because people are tied into higher truck prices. Now if they sell it, they're selling things at a loss. Operating expenses are still really high, and ultimately rates are not there.
Yeah, and I think obviously, like when I say the bottom, I guess I'm not really talking about the actual bottom. I think 10 months from now is actually where we see supply and demand more in alignment, where we see some upward pressure on rates.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's going to be interesting to watch, of course, through our sonar data and through everything else. Zach and Tony, thanks so much for joining me here on the Roundtable. We'll take a short break. Back right after this.
Do you want to watch the weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And with your final check of headlines, I'm Bill Priestley. President Joe Biden has named 25 members to sit on a presidential export council, a committee that offers insight into how government policies impact U.S. trade performance. And one of those members is FedEx CEO Raj Subramaniam. Subramaniam became FedEx's CEO last year after a dramatic operational change under his leadership. His company has started major overhauls of its costly operational modes. The council will be chaired by Washington businessman Mark D. Ein, and other members include Rosalind Brewer, former COO of Starbucks and CEO of Sam's Club, plus other experts from labor, real estate, national security, and law firms. And French fulfillment provider Stacy has completed its acquisition of Atlanta-based Armware Fulfillment LLC, which provides direct-to-consumer fulfillment from 15 U.S. facilities. The financial terms were not disclosed, but both companies remain privately held. The combined company will operate 81 fulfillment centers, 18 in the United States and 63 across the UK and Europe, totaling 9.8 million square feet. The entity will continue to operate as Armware Fulfillment with Stacy's existing facilities in New Jersey, Tennessee, and now Nevada, becoming part of the Integrated American Network. And regional parcel delivery carrier LaserShip / On Track has earned Mike Duffy, the company's new CEO, effective immediately. Duffy succeeds Mark Holyfield, who's stepping down from the company as well as from the board of directors. Holyfield was named CEO in October of 2021 after a long career at the Home Depot and has been only in the role formally since November 8th of 2021. Duffy is currently the CEO of Fleet Pride, the nation's largest distributor of truck and trailer parts, and will remain active in that company until his successor takes over. And you can find details of these stories and more on FreightWaves.com and the FreightWaves app. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. For more of the full FreightWaves experience, head over to tv.freightwaves.com. Now back over to the wall for our final carrier update of the day.
Final carrier update of the morning. That means our lanes of the day. Donnie, gonna start here. Laredo's one we've talked about a lot. Definitely seen a pickup in volumes coming across the border. This one, it is a long haul out of Laredo. We looked at that earlier, right? Rejection's pretty high. A lot of volume coming out of the market. Rates haven't reacted.
Yeah, so I picked Laredo for one, we saw it on the maps. I picked Louisville because it was also another one that was dark blue on the maps. And to see how they kind of react together. I mean, there's a big truck plant in Louisville. There could be a lot of parts coming across the border from Laredo.
Yep.
It's a lane I used to run. And so here's 1,265 miles. But as we see, with the rejection rates being, overall still kind of low, the rates just haven't responded to out of Laredo.
Yeah.
But still, it doesn't mean that we should just ignore it. Keep an eye on it and to see if it starts to turn back up. And you see it kind of flattened out here. It could be starting here any day. And once it does, there'll be a lot of people that want to flood into Laredo thinking it's their hot time.
Yep.
So definitely keep an eye on this one. 214 a mile, 1,265 miles, not too bad. But you remember, you're also running through a lot of these areas that have the cheapest prices on fuel.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things, we've talked about it and you've talked about it. We were trying to find things, especially on this length of haul, that are near the NTI or relatively close, because obviously we wanted things to be above $3 a mile. Long haul is not going to be there, especially out of a market like Laredo, but 214 at the discount that it is compared to the national average, it could be a tough one to swallow, but like you said, it's almost 1,300 miles.
And I don't think there's any hills in Texas you got to climb. The wind's behind you, so you might get pretty good fuel mileage too. All right, let's go on to the next chart. Louisville headed back to Laredo. So I thought maybe that this would be a better rate coming back, but right now it's not.
Yeah.
So here you're averaging about $2 a mile, including fuel. So it might be best to maybe overall this be your contracted lane, and then finding some freight out of Laredo on the spot market to get out of there. And I say, Laredo's hot for about just a few months out of the year, so then its time is coming. So this will be a good lane here to get locked into probably over the next 2 or 3 months.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, next lane. Omaha. So Omaha is a darker color. It has some volumes out there for long haul. We're looking at it here, Omaha to Harrisburg. Again, old people don't want to go to the Northeast. If you want the better rates, then you need to go to the Northeast. It's an 1,100-mile lane, but it's still at 245. So this is a pretty good rate for an 1,100-mile lane. Again, there's actually literally not really a huge mountain range until you get closer, to the PA. That you're running a lot of flat land from Omaha into Harrisburg. So again, headed west to east, should be a pretty good lane. But how's it going to look when we turn around and come back out of Harrisburg? Hit our little double arrows to switch this around, and we get down to $1.88. Now, there is one problem I have with Harrisburg, and especially the long hauls. Harrisburg's kind of like Denver as well. You don't want to really run the entire 1,100 miles. If you have a contract out of Omaha and you're running to Harrisburg, you probably want to try to maybe get Harrisburg to Indianapolis, and you're still going to pay a shorter lane at the low price. And then finding Indianapolis back out to Omaha, and you get a much better rate. So you want to kind of hopscotch this because you want to minimize that lane coming out of that, what would be necessarily a red market.
Yeah, but the key there is to time it right, because again, you've got you're going to break up 100 or 1,000, over 1,000 miles into multiple stops. You want to make sure your timing's right, because you can get into those awkward tweener hauls that, hey, it's a day and a half right in that interesting spot that's hard to cover, not really efficient overall.
Might have made this the better choice.
Yep, exactly.
Good point. All right, next lane, last lane. Omaha to Atlanta, headed down to the southeast. I thought this would pay a little bit better because it was headed into the southeast, but it's only paying $2.23 a mile. So this is a tough one to swallow here. This is not a lane that I would really want to be running out of Omaha. But if we reverse this and look at the backhaul, hit a little double arrows there, and see what it is paying back, it's only paying $1.91 back. So actually it's maybe a little bit better than that Harrisburg lane. It's a little bit, about 100 miles shorter, 115 miles shorter. So this actually might be the better, if you had a choice that either go to Atlanta or go to Harrisburg out of Omaha, you might want to pick the Atlanta lane.
It's so important to put it in Market Dashboard, run them, figure out what's the best for you. Thank you, Donnie, for the updates. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Bill and Anthony.
And that's going to do it for this edition of FreightWaves Now, but the fun doesn't stop here, Bill. The hour countdown begins for the best freight economics show in the world, and that is, of course, Freightonomics, that will be airing in just about an hour here.
And then, of course, after that, you've got Refuel coming up, Scott Burhang's new show. This is interesting stuff, especially if you're looking at hedging, looking at how you can get the best price on that. There's a great show there to watch, taking the higher road there as well. America on 18 Wheels and People Speaking Rail all the way coming up this afternoon as well. So a great lineup this afternoon on FreightWaves TV.
That's right, and if by chance you did miss our State of Freight, you're in luck. You can still tune in and watch that on demand. That is going to be one of the most recent things that we've put out, and definitely something you want to watch and rewatch and take notes. It's going to feature our founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, alongside Zach Strickland, head of Freight Market Intelligence, and this is the kind of content that you don't want to miss out on, because it's definitely going to be one of those areas where it's going to highlight all the major supply chain trends that's going to be pertinent to you and your business.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as well. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm here and Kaylee's not here, we had some weather come through last night. Don't worry, she's fine. Everything's okay, but she'll be back tomorrow.
We'll see you then.
All right.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.